Indiana law cracks down on CDLs for certain drivers. Braun makes endorsements ahead of Election Day, and changes in leadership at DCS. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending April 24th, 2026.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.
Indiana is one of the first states in the nation to crack down on non-citizens having commercial trucking license, or CDLs, according to Indiana lawmakers. Caroline Beck reports on how the new law is impacting Indiana's trucking industry.
Indiana has already revoked the CDLs of about 1,800 drivers, according to Indiana's Bureau of Motor Vehicles. That follows a new law that went into effect April 1st, which removes CDLs from drivers who no longer meet the proper requirements for an immigrant work visa. The new law is also meant to fine employers caught violating the new law. But Governor Mike Braun said during the ceremonial signing of the legislation that he didn't know of any Indiana companies currently breaking the law, but it's likely companies from other states who are employing drivers illegally.
I think we know where it's coming from. Indiana is just going to be a really good place to ferret it out because of how much commerce passes through our state.
The law makes it so that driving with a false CDL can be a level 6 felony.
So is this going to make Indiana highways safer? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat, Terry Austin. Republican, Mike O'Brien. Laura Merrifield Wilson, professor of political science at the University of Indianapolis, and Ebony Chappelle, director of brand and community strategy at Free Press Indiana. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. So, Terry, Indiana is leading the nation now in this effort, specifically with CDL licenses, or CDLs. Is this a good move?
Well, I think anything we can do to keep our highways safe and people safe is a positive step. But this is not just about revoking CDL licenses. It's about also ferreting out those fraudulent CDL schools, and there are many of them out there. It's going after the trucking firms, the companies who, and many of them pop up overnight, quite honestly, who employ and have no standards and don't do their due diligence for checking CDL validity. Those are the kinds of things that I think this is a good first step, but there's so much more that really needs to be done. Almost 500,000 people were involved in accidents last year that involved large trucks, semis, and others.
Well, we did hear the governor say, Mike, that, Indiana is maybe not companies that are doing it here, but it's other states that we're worried about, too. And now will be a good state to be able to ferret out these drivers. How might something like that?
The feds are doing this, too. So the language in House Bill 1200 mirrored, as far as the visas that can be used, or if you're non-domiciled, but you're legally here on a visa, it narrowed which visas that actually applied to, down to 3, and that's what House Bill 1200 basically just copied the federal standard. But it's a unique license because the feds can because it's interstate commerce, the feds have determined what they have a role in saying who can have a CDL, but the states issue them, and so the states can also determine who gets these and whether or not they qualify. So the reason the legislature moved, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, we kind of got ahead of the feds, but it's going to be the standard across the country anyway. Yeah. We're not going to be doing anything different than what's happening in other places. So I don't think you're probably going to see a lot of states follow us in this. We just tried to get ahead of it, and the reason we tried to get ahead of it was because we had 2 high-profile deaths and crashes during session that caused the legislature to react. And one of those crashes, both were here illegally, and one had 3 different CDLs under 3 different forms of identification. So he kept changing his identification every time they would find him and then revoke the CDL until he finally killed these people and I think is now in prison or is on his way. Wow. So that was the justification for this.
And we did have those high-profile accidents involving people with uncertain documentation. I guess that's the issue behind this as well, as we follow the federal government as well in immigration legislation. Is this targeting specifically that along those lines, or do you think this is more reactionary, Ebony?
So I think that part of the concern, because there are some people in the trucking industry that are very concerned about the narrative and the framing around this legislation. When you look at the federal data, fatal crashes involving large trucks in Indiana has gone down year over year since 2022. So I think that's important to point out. Todd Spencer of the Owner Operator Association told WTHR that he would like to see more data gathered that points specifically to what groups of people or what licensures are involved in these crashes. And I think that that would be an important point to raise up, because the narrative around it is targeting specifically immigrants who are coming over here, who are making a living for themselves. Yes, are there bad actors? Absolutely. Are there things that need to be done, as Terry pointed out, to make our roadways safer? Absolutely. You know, I have a stepmother who is a truck driver as her profession, so I see the strain that it puts on people. Also, how some of these corporations, you know, they're taskmasters and they're just wanting drivers to be on the road for hours and hours and doing things that are unsafe. So there does need to be a level of regulation that is upheld as a standard. But I think being careful about the narrative framing and painting one specific group and demonizing one specific group when it is an overarching issue, I think is part of it that needs to be discussed.
I know there was some talk as well, Laurie, and we 1,800 people in the state lost their license here, and would that impact the trucking industry, and whether or not you know, we would feel the impact of losing those? We've heard maybe not so much immediately, but possibly down the road.
Yeah, well, that's 1,800 fewer drivers, so it will have an impact. To previous points, you still need to have safe instruction, as safety is paramount here. And I think when Representative Jim Pressel introduced this legislation, the concern is going to be safety. It was because you had these high-profile incidents, and if this legislation is effective, not only, of course, will we need to replace those drivers, so we're going to need to make sure that there are people interested. We have a pipeline. We're talking about this as a vocation. We have high-quality schools that are offering licensing training that really is strong and is high quality. But in addition to that, I think when you look at other factors in terms of safety, and especially when you're talking about a large semi-truck, it's not like a little Honda Accord, you know, in terms of the impact it can have. I think all of those things are factors in this legislation. My guess is it's the beginning, not the end.
Yeah. It's time now for viewer feedback. Every week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: will the state's move to restrict CDLs for non-citizens improve highway safety? Vote yes or no. The last question posed to viewers: will this funding help ease the child care crisis facing some Hoosier families? The answer, 50-50. And I hear that's barely been ever done here before. Only one vote difference. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Governor Mike Braun recently issued a number of endorsements for Indiana House and Senate campaigns ahead of the May primary. Ben Thorpe reports Braun joined President Donald Trump in threatening to back primary challengers against lawmakers who did not support redistricting, but also endorsed several House lawmakers who did vote against the effort.
In December, Governor Braun said he would be working with the president to challenge lawmakers who rejected efforts to redraw the state's congressional boundaries to favor Republicans. Trump has made good on his own threats, endorsing a primary opponent in all but one of the races against state senators up for re-election who voted against redistricting. Braun also endorsed the primary challengers for senators who voted against redistricting, but in issuing his endorsements, Braun threw his support behind several House lawmakers who opposed redistricting. A spokesperson for the governor did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
So, Mike, were there any surprises with these endorsements?
Not in the Senate. It was a little surprising that he endorsed people that voted against it in the House, including Greg Sturwald, who was the author of the maps in 2020. Who has a primary opponent. It's wild. I don't know. This is going to be a mixed bag. I think what I think happens at the end of the day, everyone's going to be able to declare victory. MAGA world's going to pick off a few of these. SMCC is going to defend a few. Everyone will say they won, and we'll move on down the road. If you look at the campaign finance report just came out. So if you look at like Spencer Deary, the outside money dynamic and the fundraising of the individual candidates is wildly different. Spencer Deary's raised $502,000. His opponents raised $21,000.
Yep.
$2 million outside money has been spent in that race. I mean, and that's not unique to that race. That's the Buck race. It's the Walker race. Goods raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. His opponent raised $8,000. So this is very much like there is no real sign of money is not the only thing that matters, but there's still basic rules in politics that do apply in almost every situation. But sure, and maybe some of these candidates are hitting 10,000 doors, or maybe they're these outside. But this is just so everyone's clear, this is not a Hoosier-grown set of campaigns. This is a DC-based set of campaigns. And it is all outside money, and it is all secret money. So we don't know who the hell's paying for all this stuff. Where all this funding's coming from. And I'll tell you what, they don't care at all about what happens next in Indiana. They're going to get a pound of flesh and move on. And we're going to be left to clean up whatever mess, whether it's the leadership challenges or whatever, however the math changes. I think Democrats are going to add to their minority, at least one seat in Indianapolis. So, but I think what the real outcomes here is going to be is like everyone's just going to say they won, and we'll just have to look back on it.
I mean, it may be really telling, Terry, what the outcome is, as to where the Republican Party stands today and the rift amongst the party. And is it telling as well that Braun, stood behind majority of what President Trump wanted to have done?
I don't think that was surprising at all. I do think, though, that it could, whatever the outcome of this primary election is going to be, and then again in the fall, could help lay the groundwork for future discussions about redistricting efforts in Indiana. I think we're seeing that play out across the country. And, if we didn't get the Bears, we're going to get something. So maybe it's going to be redistricting. So.
Well, Laura, you also had, we spoke to you for this story this week. An interesting point about, just all the time and the money and the effort put towards these campaigns. And is it all for naught if it's just a note in the cliffs?
I mean, it very well could be. I think interesting in terms of those endorsements is State Senate District 6 with Rick Niemeyer. He's competing against challenger Jay Starkey. No endorsement either from Braun or Trump, which feels mostly unusual. But when you're talking about endorsements, when you're talking about money, there's so much focus on these races. And I think when we're looking at it, in a way it feels like this is the last opportunity to answer or how did Hoosiers really feel about redistricting. But I would point out, with all that money, all the advertising, it really feels like the challengers have shifted what they're saying, and they're not focused on the redistricting message. They're focused on who's going to be more conservative in the Republican primary, right? And I think that is telling. Maybe some of the polling, maybe some of just the vibes in the room are that redistricting isn't going to be a winning message for those challengers. They have to focus on something else if they're going to unseat those incumbents. I
mean, as she mentioned, it has been extremely interesting to watch, but those 3 House members that he chose to, say it's all right if you voted against redistricting. I mean, maybe that says a little bit more about, it's really not about this issue at heart.
Yeah. I saw it as maybe if you can't beat them, join them situation, specifically with those 3 House seats, because those incumbents are very well suited to win their primaries easily. I think the only one where we may see some sort of competition is in District 40, as he mentioned, with Greg Stewart-Wild and Sid Mahant. That might be one of the only ones of that 3 where we see that. So I think that it is the governor looking, reading the tea leaves and figuring out maybe this is not necessarily an area where I need to focus in so much on bringing the hammer down.
I think he did come out this week in support of the challenger to Niemeyer, if I'm not incorrect. So they didn't totally forget about the race, but
I don't know which was right. We'll have to go back and look after.
Well, we'll all be watching, and the country's watching as well ahead of primaries. Indiana also has a new leader for the Department of Child Services. Its previous director had been on medical leave. Caroline Beck reports on the latest appointment from Governor Mike Braun.
Jennifer Dorfmeyer will continue to lead DCS, which she has been doing since January. Previous director Adam Krupp took a leave of absence after being hospitalized. Dorfmeyer will oversee an agency of about 4,000 state employees that are meant to protect Hoosier children from abuse and neglect. Governor Mike Braun said that Krupp will continue to serve as a special advisor to the governor on child welfare issues.
When he did leave, she did an excellent job. We'll see how that works for him in terms of the new role, and we'll go from there.
Before working at DCS, Dorfmeyer had led Choices Coordinated Care Solutions, which helps families and youth navigate the foster care system.
So, Ebony, will we now see some stability with this change in leadership at the agency?
You would think so. Jennifer Dorfmeyer, obviously someone with a wealth of experience and knowledge coming into this role. However, the governor's decision to give Adam Krupp a new gig, so to speak, that we really don't understand how it's going to work, and spend almost $250,000 in doing so, I think points to creating more instability for this agency, which has already experienced so much. The director has been away on medical leave. You have overwhelming caseloads for the workers that are there, lots of turnover. Adam Krupp, eliminated some of those roles within the agency. So I think it is creating more instability right now. Also, you point to the issue of added bureaucracy. Who's going to really be in charge? Who's really going to be running this agency? And at the end of the day, what does it mean for Hoosier families and children to have money be pulled in this direction when we could have hired more help, more boots on the ground help to do the day-to-day work of serving families and children?
I mean, Laura, do you think it is unusual for an advisor position like this from a previous director? And I hope Jennifer's getting paid just as handsomely.
Yes, and I believe the Indiana Capitol Chronicle confirmed that she is.
Okay,
it does seem unusual. And in particular, you have three people, essentially, because you also have the Health and Human Services Secretary overseeing DCS. On one hand, I can't think of many more important things than child welfare in our state, but we're also funding salaries. So these are people, not policies or programs. What I would love to see is that we see improvements in some of the areas that we really need to. And maybe having more cooks in the kitchen in this case could be a good thing. But typically that's not how that term works out. That's not why we say that. So I think we'll have to wait and see. It does feel very unusual. I would hope that it has a positive effect, and I just don't know.
I mean, when we are considering this, Terry, and we're thinking about, the welfare of Indiana's children, Department of Child Services has had a little bit of a rocky history in the state, and a lot of directors have even spoken out about how difficult this job is. And Braun also mentioned during his signing of the law this week that this is a very difficult position to hold. Does it make sense for, two leaders to maybe manage the agency?
Well, I think if you have clearly defined roles and expectations and there's a clear line of authority and they support the decisions that the other one may make. The last thing you want is to set up an agency where people know how to do end runs around. I mean, and we see that happen not just in government, but in the corporate world too. So I think whatever it takes to keep Indiana's children safe, because it's the results that matter here. And quite honestly, Indiana's results and scorecard on this issue are not good.
Yeah, I mean, we have had, issues in the past. And I know that Director Krupp had changed, as Ebony mentioned, the number of managerial roles and also reduced the number of regional offices. Do you think those changes have added support to an agency in need of support?
Yeah, we'll see how the data plays out. I think having more people at the highest level of government focused on child services and child safety is a good thing. Yeah. How they operate interpersonally, I think the roles will have to be well defined. There's been a lot more money put in this agency in recent years. Ever since we separated it from FSSA back in 2006. Yeah. There's been I think that's been helpful in terms of just like the focus on it and like the independent nature of it. So it's good to have somebody, if you're going to have a one-off special advisor for any agency, it's this one. But yeah, we'll see how the data plays out. It is a hard agency.
Yeah.
I mean, you're at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out whether kids should be able to stay with their parents, or if a parent is getting ready to kill the kid, and can you intervene first? I mean, it's messy, and it's a really complicated role for government, but a necessary one.
Absolutely a necessary one that we will be looking at as well. Well, the next election for Indianapolis mayor is already taking shape, even though it's more than a year away. Zach Castle reports 3 Democrats are now vying for the spot.
There's an entire election cycle before voters will choose a new mayor in 2027, but that hasn't stopped Democratic candidates from throwing their hats into the ring. City County Council member Vop Osley announced his candidacy in January. Indianapolis State Senator Andrea Hunley put to rest rumors, filing her paperwork to run this week. Another Democratic candidate, David Bride, has also filed to run. He works at the city's Department of Public Works as Stormwater Division Administrator. Mayor Joe Hogsett has so far not said if he will run. In a statement, his campaign said he is currently focused on governing.
So, Laura, do you think it's unusual to see this high of interest for a local mayoral race this early?
Yes, a year and a half out. I mean, I'm still excited about the congressional midterms. I'm one of those people, the next day you celebrate and get excited for the next election.
It's like putting up your Christmas tree before Thanksgiving.
It is, right? That's sacrilege to some folks. It is unusual. I think this does dissuade other candidates who might be interested. I'm very interested what this does in terms of the psyche for incumbent Joe Hogsett. Hasn't announced whether or not he would consider seeking a 4th term. But I think the more candidates you have, sometimes you see that kind of factionalization, and it could open up for an interesting opportunity for a Republican candidate, which to my knowledge, we don't have one in the race. But you're talking about Osley, Hunley, right, really well-qualified Democrats. And I think when you look at Bride, too, someone who's been very involved in local government, maybe a dark horse. I think this is a really interesting race, albeit one that we'll focus, I hope, a lot more on after the congressional midterms.
I mean, we have not heard from Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett whether or not definitively he will run again. I predict that he will not. But Ebony, what are you thinking?
Oh, it is so hard to tell because we were told the last time this is the last time, and that proved to not be true. He also has quite a treasure trove of cash to put either behind himself or another candidate who he chooses tonight. With such, I do think that it is interesting to see this much energy around it, and I think that it points to some of the attention that we've seen on the mayor's office. Tons of attention on the mayor's office, which I think necessitates candidates wanting to use some of that energy, whether it be positive or negative, to raise themselves up. And especially when you think about a candidate like Andrea Hunley, you know, she has about $100,000 to Vop's, I don't even know how many dollars, I forgot the number, right. But tons, lots more than that. And time is a currency, so the more time that you have to build your name recognition, do the interviews, work the circuits, it just improves your chances. So I think that these candidates see this runway and the lack of information from the current mayor as an opportunity to boost themselves up.
I mean, it will be an interesting race, Terry. These Democrats here in the capital city, as Ebony mentioned, you know, some controversy around the mayor's office. Obviously, Vop Osley has been in his administration for quite some time. But then you have someone like Andrea Hunley, who spent a lot of time over at the State House. Is this going to be a good race?
I think it's going to be a very interesting race. And I think we'll start to see the candidates begin to define their priorities and issues. Andrea Hunley was elected to the state senate, was it 2 years ago? Mm-hmm. 2 years ago. That's not a long time in government. She was an outstanding principal for IPS, Center for the Inquiry School number 2, and did a remarkable job of leading teachers and students. And, you know, and she's well qualified. Whether or not people think you need a little more experience in government to actually become the CEO of a city is still going to play out, I think.
I mean, will we be looking to what does the Republican Party need to do to have a really solid candidate for this mayoral election next year? Last time around, it was Jefferson Shreve, who now sits in one of our congressional districts. Mm-hmm. Where do Republicans look?
We had the best funded, best organized campaign we've had for mayor since Greg Ballard last cycle and didn't come close. I think the demographics in Marion, I speak out of two sides of my mouth. I was Hendricks County chairman and voting. What am I trying to say when I vote all Republican, when I hit the button? Straight ticket. Straight ticket in Hendricks protected the Republicans. Straight ticket in Marion County protects the Democrats because you're already 40% behind after election day. You got to go make up. You got to go win like 80% of the rest of the vote to get 51% because you're already 40% behind when Democrats vote straight ticket. So I think it's really hard for Republicans to mount a challenge. We had a great cycle last year, and it didn't matter.
Right.
So I think our focus will probably be on council districts.
Always the year the Ballard won, though. You never know. That's what we love about it. Well, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel has been Democrat Terry Austin, Republican Mike O'Brien, Laura Merrifield Wilson, Professor of Political Science at the University of Indianapolis, and Ebony Chappelle, Director of Brand and Community Strategy at Free Press Indiana. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Jill Sheridan, Managing Editor at WFYI. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.